the key here is 4-8, 7 days away, Ethan. I'm just going to start this conversation off rip and give it to you. And here's how I think a good way that we could set it up. So I'm going to ask you at 4, who is just, if everything goes perfect for the Spurs, who's your number one preferred player? You know,
Oh,
um, I know that's a tough question. That's a tough question. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean and I'm just going to say this, not to muddy up the conversation before we get to it, but I'm not saying necessarily like a Risacher there, because that's probably, not as likely, even though there are like some slim chances of it happening. But, if everything goes the way that the Spurs want it to, I guess you could throw him in there if you really wanted to. But then also, if for some reason your favorite player isn't on the board at 4, the player that you're thinking of here, is taken before the Spurs pick, who are just 2 other names that you would also uh, want at number 4 if that person wasn't available.
I think the perfect situation for the Spurs would be if somehow Risacher fell to 4. I think I think that's pretty universal. He's a guy that most people have at 1 or 2 in their mock drafts. We've talked about it at length, what he brings to a team. Super athletic, tall, lengthy. Right off the bat, can be a 3-and-D specialist, and in the playoffs has shown the ability to play at a higher level, put the ball on the floor, and I think has a higher ceiling than I think you and I maybe had thought like a month or two ago. I don't want to speak for you, but I thought maybe, especially after speaking with Lou, maybe he was a little
Right.
more limited. But I think what we saw in the playoffs and what everyone's been talking about from his workouts, he's a guy that has a high ceiling that the Spurs would be lucky to pick up. Plus, there's that French connection. If he's gone, which I think he will be at 1 or 2, I think Stephon Castle is the guy that I would like at 4. Um, he's a name in the latest mock drafts that a lot of people have us taking at 4 and or 8. I think personally, I'd rather just take him at 4 if he's available, rather than risk him going at 5, 6, or 7 because of his defensive upside, versatility, his ability to play basically 1 through 3 as well as defend 1 through 3. And I saw an article or a video, I can't remember which, where people are saying the Spurs are kind of resting on their laurels with defense because Victor Wembanyama is so gifted, right? But in this person's eyes, and forgive me for not remembering their name because I want to give them credit, but in their eyes, the Spurs needed to lean into that defensive identity. So
Mm-hmm.
by surrounding Victor with more elite defensive players, which I think he is, I think he's probably the best point of attack defender in the draft. For us to draft him kind of shores up the defensive liability at the point guard position because of Trey Jones. Sure, shooting liability is going to be a question right off the bat, but we saw how he was able to shoot in the combine. He performed well there. And I think you and I and Lou and a lot of other people in the comments have been saying shooting is something that can be taught. We've seen it with Kawhi Leonard. We've seen it, I know not a huge jump, but Jeremy Sohan got a lot better from rookie year to last year. We've seen it consistently throughout the league. Paul George is another name. So I think if we can get him to mid 30% shooting from 3 for a career, and I think that's honestly low potential for him, then he's a guy that can answer a lot of needs for the Spurs and be a long-term solution at that point guard spot and help defend big guards like Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous, guys we'll see down the line.
So there you go. You got Risacher, as kind of the perfect scenario. And then maybe probably in all likelihood, Stephon Castle would be, somebody at 4 that probably there's going to be more of a likelihood that he would be available in
For sure.
comparison to Risacher. Now, I do just want to ask you if there's one other name that you'd have to mention at 4. If for some reason, like the
Mhm.
Rockets are just like, screw you, San Antonio, we're going to take Stephon at 3.
Right. If Stephon and Risacher are gone, I think Reed Sheppard's another name that I would take it for because he's a guy for sure would be gone 5, 6, or 7 if we were to let him slip past our fingers. And sure, he's not without his deficiencies as size, and there's questions about his defense, even though he plays really hard nosed defense, kind of reminiscent of Derek White. But he is a 6'1" frame, but he's very athletic. We saw his vertical in the combine, and he is an elite shooter. And if we're going to talk about defense being the number 1 need for the Spurs, number 2 need is by far and away shooting. And there are people that think guys like Castle are not worth drafting because they can't shoot. Reed Sheppard, you don't have that issue at all. And he's a very efficient scorer from the field in general as well. And a guy that I think could also offer a solution at that point guard spot. Maybe he doesn't start right away. I don't know because the Spurs they love Trey Jones and all that stuff. We have the rookie thing. But off the bench, he'd be extremely explosive.
Yeah, and just another thing from what I've been reading, I want to say that Reed Sheppard measured at 6'2" at the combine. I could maybe correct myself there, but I know for a fact he's listed at 6'3" in shoes on the court. So he's a little bit bigger than Rob Dillingham, if I'm remembering correctly. If you're looking that up, you
Right.
can
This
tell.
says 6'1.8". So basically
Okay.
6'2".
Yeah, so that's where I'm getting that from. Cause and you know how remember how we did the mock draft where Gavoni was kind of changing up the measurements? Like
Right.
that's basically the same thing as Stephon Castle being listed at 6'7" when
Mhm.
he's like 6'5.8", not in shoes. Then you add an inch with the shoes. Anyways, you get what I'm saying. The point is that I'm coming up with there. He is a little bit bigger than like a Rob Dillingham per se.
Right.
But I do understand the people's concerns there. But also, I mean, when I look back at his defensive tape, I don't really see too many holes there for me personally. Now I understand like people saying that maybe he could get bullied in some matchups in the NBA, but that's for anybody at his size. So
For sure. And there are elite point guards at his size already, all-stars that struggle on defense. So I'm not saying that it's like for sure going to limit his career, but it's just like when you look at him, I think that's really the only potential negative, to be completely honest. He has everything else already.
right. And the thing that makes me feel better about that is the athleticism and the
Mhm.
numbers that he showed at the combine. That was my biggest criticism of him initially. I was up here saying I didn't think it was going to translate. I felt like he
Mhm.
wasn't going to be able to do the things that he did because of the athleticism difference in the NBA. But I think what he showed at the combine and also just with further research from myself, that's who I have as my number one pick at number
Mm,
4. That kind of leads into this, Ethan. And literally, the only reason that I have him a little bit above Stephon is just because I feel like there's less holes to poke in his game. And really, that just comes down to the shooting.
mm,
Now, what I will say with that, and I've talked to some other people about this, and I even said this, I believe, in the big board video that I made. If Stephon Castle but ends up becoming like a 38% or a 40% three-point shooter, then unequivocally, in my opinion, I can see like his ceiling's higher than Reed's.
mhm,
But if I'm just being completely honest here, and thinking about all the different things, like, okay, Reed can basically, in my opinion at least, other than the size, he
mhm.
can provide everything that Stephon does on top of being a sniper. So, the Spurs' biggest needs. What do you disagree there?
I think they're in completely different classes defensively.
I disagree.
Everything else, I think that in the NBA, his competition is going to be way bigger, way more athletic, even at his size. Um, I don't know if it'll correlate as quickly. I think that their difference. I mean, this is going way overboard for everybody here, but like comparing prime, I don't even want to say this because it's everyone's gonna make fun of me.
You're
Prime
good.
Kawhi Leonard versus like peak Derek White, like both really good defenders.
No, yeah, and even though I said I disagree with you, I get what you're saying right here. I do.
It's like one's a DPOY guy potentially, and one guy's like all defensive second or first team, like a handful of
That's
times in
fair.
his career.
That's
So
fair. I just think Reed is also going to be really good at defense. That's just
yeah.
my personal opinion. Now, with that being said, there's just some things that, like you said, aren't
Mhm.
comparable when one's 6'7" and one's 6'2". You know what I mean? So
Yep.
I do completely like there's just with Stephon's frame, he's just automatically gonna have a higher defensive potential, especially in the NBA and with the way that the league is going, than Reed.
For sure.
But I think the shooting thing, and on top of him still being, like you said, a potential all NBA defender, that's why I kind of have him there. But again, if he gets the jump shot down, I don't really think there's a comparison when it comes to their ceiling. And even if he doesn't ever become that great of a shooter, I don't think that there's a giant gap between
Mhm.
their ceiling, which is why my second preferred choice at number 4 is Stephon Castle. I really just want either of those guys. And to be honest with you, if the Spurs are on the board or if both of those guys are on the board when the Spurs are there and the Spurs pick Stephon Castle, I'm not going to be mad at all. And I'm going to trust the front office because those
Mhm.
guys know more than I do and they know the fit, of these guys as well. And really, I think Stephon's more realistic as well, Ethan, because there's been a ton of smoke that I've seen about Reed Sheppard with the Rockets. There is some potential trade talk there where if there's a move made, maybe he would still be on the board. But I don't think the Spurs have had Reed Sheppard in for a workout, but I know they have had Stephon Castle in for a workout where actually he went head to head with Devin Carter Another
Right.
name that we've talked about, um, and that's a whole nother conversation. I want to get into Devin Carter, but the point I was trying to get at there is that Stephon Castle has had a workout with the Spurs, and I don't know. I'm saying this, maybe I just completely missed it, but I haven't seen anything that Reed has worked out with the Spurs.
Right. I haven't seen anything either. And at 4, if they are both available, I know I put Stephon Castle as my preferred choice, but I mean, the Spurs would have to do their research, obviously. But I think Reed Sheppard has a higher likelihood of going 5, 6, or 7 than Stephon Castle does. So,
Yeah.
like, if they think that there is a high likelihood that we can get Castle at 8 and Reed's available at 4, I think you got to pick Reed at 4.
Yeah, I don't think Stat Castle would be available at 8 though.
You don't think so?
No.
I think maybe the Hornets would take him.
That's where I've seen him going the most.
I don't see
If we don't
Detroit.
take him.
I don't see Detroit.
I agree there.
I don't see Portland because they just have so many guards unless they're debating on blowing
It's
everything
mainly
up.
Charlotte.
Yeah, it's gonna be Charlotte.
But even they have LaMelo, and he wants to play point guard.
They do, but they have no defense.
That's very true. And we know he's very versatile. And really,
Mhm.
LaMelo can play the 2. I mean, even though he brings
Yeah.
the ball up. But at 6'7", he's versatile in the lineups.
Right, right.
But this is why we're just excited for next week, Ethan, so we can figure it
Mhm.
out.
Yes, finally.
But here's the thing, Ethan. Regardless of our conversation there, both of us are very high on both of those guys at number 4. They're in the mix. And my other name that I'll mention here, I'll just throw out a little bit of a wild card. I was thinking about this. Obviously, if Risacher's there, like that's a given, you know.
Mhm.
But just to throw out another name, because that probably won't be the case, Donovan Clingan. If
Mm.
he slips to number 4, now granted, I actually did a mock draft today where he ended up slipping to number 8, and that's where I picked him after I picked Reed Sheppard at number 4.
Mm.
But that's just another name that I would throw out there at 4 that I would not be completely opposed to. There's been a lot of smoke that's been coming out of a lot of, like, he's the only other player that the Hawks have worked out other than Risacher. The Hawks actually haven't worked out Alex Sarr. I
Yeah.
read that today, which is that surprises me, but also we kind of have been hearing the Risacher smoke a little bit. But the whole reason I bring up, not to interrupt you, but just
Very
to
good.
finish the thought here, the whole reason I bring up Donovan Clingan there is the fact that, I mean, there are some connections of them maybe trading down and picking him, but also there has been like a little bit of whispers and stuff that they may like legitimately take him at number 1. I'm not saying that the Spurs should do that, but the whole reason I bring up Donovan Clingan is he's one of the more sure things in the draft. I was talking with a friend about this. I feel like his floor is kind of like a Zubox or a Walker Kessler. And I
Mm.
know at number 4, that's not necessarily going to, get everybody super excited. But in this draft, there, I mean, that being a floor, I mean, that's almost like a starting center. But I think he could even, like, his ceiling, I was thinking about this today, is almost like a prime Drummond like, because he's just
Mm.
a huge dude. Like, pause.
Right.
But he's 7'2", like almost, I think like 280 pounds, something like that. We've seen what he's done at UConn the past 2 years for them defensively. And we know the Spurs' biggest weakness, Ethan. It's when you take Victor Wembanyama off the floor, and he would just do so many things. Like all of the issues that we have whenever we take Wemby off the floor, whenever it comes to defense, rebounding, interior presences, physicality, that is exactly what Donovan Clingan does. So anyways, I'll stop my rant on Donovan Clingan there. I understand that's not the sexiest pick,
Mm.
but that's another name that I would throw out there. Potentially, if some wackiness happens, but I would not pick him over Reed or Stephon, and I think both of those guys will be there.
Right. That was exactly what I was going to say. If it comes down to it, if it's between Reed, Castle, or Clingan, or any one of those combinations, I would take Reed and Castle first. Um, but I do like everything that you said, and it's all completely valid. Like, he does fix every issue that we had when Victor wasn't on the court last year, and even he could play next to Vic at times. If we wanted to play like an ultra big lineup and not let Victor get beat up down low by an Embiid or a Jokic or an AD, if we wanted to just match that up size for size, that would work. And I've heard also that, according to Atlanta at least, his shooting is a lot better than they expected it to be, in his private workouts. I don't know how much validity there is to that, but that's the rumor going around. And I also think Alex Sarr I heard this, and correct me if you haven't heard this, but I heard that he was actually not. He was refusing to go to Atlanta. Not that Atlanta wasn't working him out. Like he did not want to go work out for them, um, which I found interesting.
Um, I did not see. Sorry, I thought I got a phone call for a second, so I was checking that to see who it was.
You're good.
Um, Ask me that question one more time. It threw me
I
off a
said
little bit.
I saw that.
You're never mind. You're good. I heard what I'm remembering now. Alex Sarr and the Wizards, and Alex Sarr not going to Atlanta. I have
Mhm.
not heard anything about that, but that would probably explain that. And also on the Donovan Clingan shooting thing, um, I have also heard that. I'm not holding my breath on that. I think
That's
that's
weird.
going to be like a very long term thing if that ever happens. Like I don't think that's going to be. And the other thing is like, what's the context of these private workouts? Like, is he just shooting open jumpers? Like,
True.
you know what I mean? I think there was one jumper that I saw on his highlights, and it was a wide open catch and shoot three. I'm not saying he can't do that, but that's not something I'm gonna bet on. I had a conversation with one of my friends today about this, and he
Mm.
put it as like I'm not gonna hold my breath on that, and I think that's a good way to put it. But something to keep an eye on. I've been seeing that too.
That all that being said, if he's available at 8, which I don't imagine that he would fall to
Right.
8, but if he is there at 8, I don't have a problem taking him, because like you said, he shores up the backup center position. I think he could play next to Victor Wembanyama against some bigger lineups in the West, and fix a lot of the issues we had with Zach last year.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. And, you know, Wemby working out with Jamal Charles, or
Right,
oh my God,
Jamal
Jamal
Craw
Charles.
he's working on his
Jamal
A gap.
Crawford. Oh my goodness. Shout out to the Chiefs in Texas.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Um, that's so funny. I just said Jamal Charles because I'm like picturing the Instagram photo with Jamal Crawford. And then
Uh-huh.
also, this is like, you remember during All-Star weekend when they said they were going to work together in the interview?
Right, yeah.
So this is that coming to fruition. Anyways, the reason I bring that up, I don't think this is going to be a full-time thing. I think I'm still sticking to the tape and what we saw this year. I do think there will be more potential down the line because the Spurs will be better. But you know, maybe if we get Klingon, there could be some. We could play Wemby at the 4 next to him.
Mm,
I'm not gonna go down that entire road again, but you know, I mean, if he's working on moves from Jamal, that's a perimeter skill set. You know what I'm saying?
for sure, for sure.
And I think he'll only get more fluid and not to say clumsy, but you know, he won't be like a baby gazelle as much anymore as he continues into the rest of his career with his ball handling. You know what I'm saying?
More balance, more coordination, for sure, for sure.